and I'll start streaming. And when I count us down, that's pretty much it, Paul. So
All right,
here we
cool.
go. Three, two, and one. All right. Well, welcome to an all new episode here of the newly coined Spurs Rewind. This is a Project Spurs exclusive live stream that we're going to be doing on a weekly basis. And basically, this is, like it says, the Spurs Rewind. We're going to be recapping the ongoings of what has happened with the San Antonio Spurs throughout the week. And joining us today to kind of give our inaugural episode a little push here is the one and only Paul Garcia of Project Spurs. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well. This Saturday, it was a Saturday morning that we're recording. Yeah, doing well today.
Yeah, we're doing well. We're live right now, too. So for anybody who's tuning in and watching this, you are watching episode 0. So if there's some gremlins, you know why, but there shouldn't be. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the San Antonio Spurs, specifically what the Spurs did yesterday in their, let's say, I don't know how to say it in a nice way. We'll just say in their lackluster performance against the Dallas Mavericks. And to the dismay of Spurs fans, Paul, this team has shown promises and they've
Mm-hmm.
also showed a lot of inconsistencies. And because it's a young core, and that's the key here because it is a young core. I had gone on record and I said this before the season even started that this season is about growth, specifically about the younger players that we have on this team. And with that comes a lot of inexperience. And I think at times we're starting to see that while some of the youth can play great, they have flashes here and there, like we've seen out of Lonnie Walker, who's had some amazing games. We've seen Keldon Johnson really come into his own this season. And really, he's just like the honey badger. He doesn't care who's in front of him. He's just going to go on straight through him, and you love his tenacity. You love his aggressiveness. But as a whole, this team still has some work cut out for them. And it all starts and stops with defense. Paul, what can you tell us about the game yesterday against the Mavericks?
It just followed a constant theme, and this is something the players talked about. This is something Coach Pop talked about was the fact that they start off really slow all the time, and it really goes back to the starting lineup. That coming into that game, that lineup is not working out for the team. So right now I think Pop will keep it in play. However, once Derek White eventually gets healthy, he has a reason to maybe make some changes there at the starting group. And you saw them again. They fall behind by 18. They clawed back. They really fought back, and they did make it a winnable game there in the end. In the last 3 minutes of the game, they had a chance multiple times. They got stops, and they could have tried to win that game, but they just couldn't execute down the stretch. Now I know that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later. Their crunch time performance, which is a theme here, where they're not able to kind of execute in the last 5 minutes of a game and try to win ball games. But overall, like you mentioned, their defense looked pretty bad in that first half, where the Mavs got over 30 plus points in each of those first two quarters. Luka Doncic was kind of doing whatever he wanted. Now we do have to notate that DeJounte Murray got hurt really early in the first minute of the game. He rolled his ankle and then he never returned to the game. So Pop says that he should be fine going forward. The Spurs haven't put out their injury report for Sunday's game yet. But again, it just goes back to the starting lineup really struggles to start off the games, and then of course that's an impact on their defense and their slow starts on offense.
One of the things that Spurs fans really get upset about is the play or the lack of defensive intensity out of one Lamarcus Aldridge. And I got to
Mm-hmm.
say, they have a legitimate gripe to be upset,
Mm-hmm.
because he's not really out there for his defensive prowess. He's out there primarily to be a scorer and kind of draw the attention of the opposing team's defense, kind of spread the defense a little bit by hitting a three now and then. But let's be honest, at this juncture, he's kind of a defensive liability, and you kind of saw that a lot last night. There were times that he actually decided to play defense, and when he did, he was okay. He wasn't bad, but most of the time, it just seems like he's not interested. And this San Antonio Spurs teams, their staple has always been defense, and
Mm-hmm.
when you have players that consistently don't show up from a defensive perspective, I think the fans are really gonna call them out, and I think that's what they've been doing with LaMarcus. What have you noticed about his defensive tendencies?
Yeah, and well, for one, me, I'm a numbers guy, so I like to look at all the data, and I mean the data has been clear since like the opening game of the season that Jakob's the better defender at this point, and that's the tough thing is that when Lamarcus is playing, struggling on defense, that Jakob's there and he's just kind of sitting on the bench, and that you have a better, you have a better defensive alternative in Jakob, and we saw what Jakob could do with this group in the bubble play when he got to be the starting center, so that's a part of it, and so as far as Lamarcus, I mean you just see it teams purposely target him on the pick and roll. You saw Steph Curry do that to him. You saw Dame Lillard this past week. You saw, yesterday Luka Doncic. And that's the thing is, he just doesn't have that dynamic to where he can shift his feet quick enough. He doesn't really bring a lot of presence at the rim, whereas Jakob kind of does deter some players from going in there. He's a little bit better at that part of his game. So that's the thing is like, defensively they have a better option in Jakob, but they want to keep Lamarcus in the starting lineup because he does bring a little bit more versatility offensively. But again, that's if he's got his game going. We saw that against the Blazers. He did really well where he had 22 points, 20 points off that mid range where he was just kind of picking and popping all night. Then of course the Warriors, he falls apart and just only has 4 points. He doesn't really get him included in the offense. But then against the Mavs yesterday, he was pretty consistent. He had 12 points from three, which is almost getting close to his career high in terms of 3-point makes. And then he was also doing a little bit more there near the glass where he had 8 points in the paint. And then of course 6 points from mid range. So again, it's very inconsistent performances from him. But even when he plays well, as we saw yesterday against Dallas, they still ended up with the loss. And he finally had that 3-point shot going, but it just wasn't working out because again, like you mentioned, Joe, on the defensive end, Dallas is constantly going to score on him and are trying to get him in pick and roll and kind of just get him mismatched.
Yeah, that it is what it is when you look at it from that perspective. These are basically our starters that really don't perform on a consistent basis. And I think a lot of that has to do with matchups, especially when they get to play teams where the matchup isn't conducive to them really going out there and, I guess, getting what they want, either from a defensive perspective or an offensive perspective. And they look bad at times. And again, it all has to do on any given game with matchups, who you're playing out there, who you're starting. And we know how Coach Pop is at times. He's stubborn to a fault, but he is a great NBA coach, one of the best, if not to ever coach in the NBA. So you got to respect his knowledge and what he sees out there. And I think at this juncture, what it really harkens to is he's not really trusting this younger core 100%. That's why he's running the lineups that he's running out there. And it's a conundrum, I guess you can say, because this younger core has to perform in order to gain that trust from Coach Pop, but they're inexperienced. So it shows, So this is a growing experience, I think, all around. The veterans are trying to impart their knowledge onto this younger core. Unfortunately, they just can't make things happen overnight. It's going to be a process. We just got to be patient. And this is going to be the normal. You're going to have some games where they look great, and in the next game, they're going to lose against teams that they should beat, and then they're going to win against teams that they have no business competing against. It's the nature of the beast. So if I have to say anything to Spurs fans at this point, just understand this is a growing experience, But I got to say one thing that has surprised me, Paul, is the play of both Rudy Gay and Patty Mills. They have been the saving grace for the Spurs coming off the bench. And you can't say enough good things about your veterans. They're doing exactly what you need them to do. Keep games close and sometimes sustain a lead if we have a lead, or try to get the game manageable if we're playing from behind. What have you noticed about both Rudy Gay and Patty Mills this season?
That just like you mentioned, they've been very consistent. They've just been, they've been a reason why the Spurs have been able to get back into ball games. As if you look at their numbers in terms of the Spurs as a team in the second quarter, it's always their best quarter, even this season to start. And it's always because of, Rudy and Patty are the big part of it in terms of scoring for that part. But then also, Devon Vasile and Jakob Poeltl flank them as well in that second unit. And Rudy, I mean, just again, really good, efficient scoring for him off the bench. He can do a little bit of everything, hit from the mid range, score a little bit inside every now and then just making his three ball. And then Patty, of course, has just been on fire to start the year coming off the bench. He's given them a lot. I know that some of their crunch time games they've lost, and people got upset because Patty's taking a lot of the shots. But I mean, really, they don't have outside of DeMar another player who's kind of able to create on their own shot. and Patty's able to do that with that little mid range that he can do coming off a screen. And you want the younger guys to be able to do that down in the toward the future. You want Keldon to be able to take over there, Lonnie and DeJounte Murray, etc. And so that's a problem, is that you want those young guys to have that part of the offense going down the stretch. But right now, those two players have really kept the Spurs in it. It's just really been the bench. I mean, the bench has been a big reason why the Spurs don't get blown out of ball games, even though they fall behind by double digits. It's the fact that they pull them right back in, or they expand their lead sometimes, and that's why they get comfortable wins every now and then. So yeah, Rudy and Patty have been really good. And I think Colin Reed on Project Spurs recently wrote about this. Rudy's defense has actually been undershadowed. I mean, he's actually been a pretty good defender for the Spurs this year. You look at the advanced metrics, he's kind of in the upper tier for them in terms of all the players, and steals and deflections and blocks and things like that. So he's actually his defense has gone underrated, I think, in my opinion. And then also you see that Pop trust him at times when they're playing teams like with more dynamic, versatile players out on in their big formation. Well, Rudy ends up closing at the 5, and you've seen Pop do that with him 3 or 4 games now. So yeah, they've been pretty good for the Spurs here off the bench.
I've seen Rudy actually hold his own against one LeBron James too when the Spurs were playing the Lakers. That's one of the things that I think goes unnoticed at times, is that Rudy's ability to play defense against some of the team's bigger players, against their bigs, so he's able to really hold his own at that juncture, even though he might not be quite athletic as he once was, because he's getting up there in age. He's not a spring chicken anymore, but he's still savvy. He still has a lot of experience, and I think it shows, as you stated, especially in game time situations. He's still able to go out there and contribute both defensively and offensively. We go back and we look at the week that is San Antonio Spurs basketball, starting off with the Portland Trailblazers. I kind of gave the Spurs no shot at winning this game, and they surprised me by handedly beating the Trailblazers 125-104. And let's be honest, the Trailblazers were without one of their more prolific players in C.J. McCollum, but the Spurs were able to, really come away with the win. And it seemed like the Blazers didn't really put up much of a fight. They did the best they could out there, but this is a game where Lamarcus Aldridge looked good. We're like, oh my God, look at him. He's out there. He's really doing his thing, both defensively and offensively. He's quite capable. And then you go back and you look, okay, they're going to play the Warriors next, which was on that Wednesday. And they looked abysmal in that game. LaMarcus all but disappeared. And it wasn't just LaMarcus. I say LaMarcus. And it's not just him. The team as a whole. When you look at it, they win or they lose collectively. And when you look at this game against the Warriors, for example, they just came out flat out of the gate. They couldn't hit any shots, both defensively and offensively. They just were out of sorts. You got to give credit, though, to the Warriors and what they were able to do to the Spurs from a defensive perspective. They just didn't let them get their sets going. They just were never comfortable out there. They made it extremely difficult for them to get open and get clean shots, clean looks at the rim. And they played the passing lanes, I think, tremendously. They just kept the Spurs on their heels, and they really made them, at this point, a one-dimensional team where they had to resort to just trying to knock down jumpers. And that's not conducive to them winning, because of your shots not falling, which it clearly was not. It's going to be a long night for them because you have to have fluidity or motion to the offense. And we always see Pop doing this to them. Move. He wants them to set screens, set, picks. You got to move without the ball. You can't just get caught ball watching and being flat-footed and just waiting for that ISO play. And I think that's what happened against the Warriors. They were waiting for that one guy to just go ahead and just put their head down and go to the rim and probably, try to kick the ball out to somebody open in the wing or beyond the arc. And it just didn't happen because of the way I think the Warriors played that passing lane. They just could not get a clean shot off, And they are good. The Spurs are a good free throw shooting team. And that was what really puzzled me. If your outside shot's not falling, put your head down, be aggressive, go to the rim, draw the foul, and get to the stripe. Because the best thing you can do is get the Warriors in foul trouble. That way the game will open up a little bit more for you because they're going to be more reluctant to try to foul you being aggressive, going to the rim. But that didn't happen. And again, I think it's attributed to the inexperience of the youth at times. I mean, What did you see in this game that really stood out at you?
Oh, you kind of just you talked about it right there. They could never get comfortable offensively, and I was really impressed because I haven't watched much Warriors basketball. I see the highlights here and there, and I was really impressed at the level of activity they had on defense. I mean, whereas that game against Portland, where the Spurs were just getting any open shot they wanted, especially against Enes Kanter as a big, nope, that was not happening against Draymond Green and James Wiseman, Andrew Wiggins, Kelly Oubre Jr. and Steph. I mean, they were just constantly the Spurs couldn't even a jumper they couldn't get wide open. It was just a really tough game for them to get any kind of good looks, and you saw them get very uncomfortable on the offensive end. And so when that happens and you can't get any easy shots, and then when you even get a 3-point look, and that's the game where they made 4 of 33 threes. That was 12%. It dropped them from I think 12th to 20th in accuracy as far as for accuracy from three. And then on the other end, you got Steph, who's just kind of doing he was basically carving up the Spurs' defense, especially in the pick and roll, where he kind of just like waltzes into the paint, and either he gets a really crafty layup, or he could just kick it out to a 3-point shooter in the corner. Then you got Draymond Green moving the ball. Kelly Oubre Jr. was getting feisty there. James Wiseman was just getting any alley-oop dunk he wanted. I mean, so that was it. And I remember the players talking about that, how it just kind of felt a little demoralizing. Where on one end for them on offense, they were first like trying so hard just to get a shot, and then when they actually get that shot, it doesn't go in because they shot 4-33 from three. But then on the other end, the Warriors just made everything look easy, and you saw that, like you mentioned, Joe. They just could not attack. I mean, I'm looking here with 50% of their shots came in the paint, so they were trying to attack, yes, but they only made 47% of those shots, which is a really low number if you're attacking the rim. The Warriors did a good job of not letting like DeRozan, Keldon Johnson, Lonnie Walker get into the paint, whereas DeJounte was pretty much the only player along with Jakob that day. And then, like I mentioned, that was that game where Pop. I remember Pop's quote was like, "If you're going to shoot 4-33 from three, you got to play perfect defense." Well, nope, that did not happen, and so that's why we saw there a blowout in the end.
Yeah, they just didn't look very good in that game, and you just chalk it up as it happens. But this has been the normal for the San Antonio Spurs, and this is what I've been trying to brace the fans for. This is probably going to be what you're going to see out of this team moving forward. If you thought that this team was going to be a team that's going to be a legit 5th, 6th, 7th seed, I'd hate to burst your bubble, but this is what you're seeing right now is pretty much what you're going to see for the rest of the season. While they might get a little bit better from as far as competition goes, being competitive, more competitive as the season, let's say, gets further along, you're really going to see what you're going to see out of this team. And what it harkens back to is that at this juncture, most good NBA teams have at least more than one superstar on their team. Somebody who's a bona fide all-star who really you can look at and say, okay, this is a certified NBA superstar. The San Antonio Spurs have a lot of young role players right now. They have some veterans, but we don't really have that legit superstar that you can say, oh, this guy's going to really take over the game when we need him the most. Kind of like we had in the past with one Tim Duncan or a Manu Ginobili or even a Tony Parker for that matter. Players who were able to take over games. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We're actually missing two things, I think. We're missing a legitimate closer, and we're also missing somebody who can anchor that defense, especially in that, I guess, the starting unit. We don't have a legit center that we can say, this guy is a legit star. He's going to be our anchor on defense. We can count on him to give us a double-double every night. We don't really have that anymore. So there's some things that we're missing, I think, on this team. But overall, I think this team has what it takes to just be competitive every night. And I said I would be happy, Paul, with the win or a loss as long as the effort's there every night and it's just not there consistently,
Well, okay, so I think I differ a little bit here on this point. I think that, like you mentioned, this team is a lot more competitive than last year and in the year past. And the reason why I say that is because you look at their losses and even their wins. It's not by a lot, and that's okay. They really had 3 games that have just been total blowouts, and they're over early. That first loss to the Lakers, the game against the Jazz where they just got just got torched from 3, and then just this recent one against the Warriors. Because like even that Mavs game, as bad as it looked, down 18, they had a chance, like I mentioned there. They had multiple chances to win this Mavs game.
They were down by 2, right? At one point?
Yeah, they were down, just down by 2 at one point, exactly. And they had like 2 or 3 chances to actually to tie it or take the lead, and they just couldn't come up with it. So I really feel like that's the difference here. Is this team is a lot more competitive. Now again, like on the flip side, they don't have really good wins either. Their wins are they're barely squeaking these games out. They have just one comfortable win, if I can remember, this season, where they've kind of just demolished the team. So that's the thing is, like, if you're competitive in this league, in this year with COVID, and teams getting canceled left and right, games getting canceled. So I think that if you can keep your record like at about 500 or above, just barely, I think you're going to be okay of being in that 7 through like 10 seed, just to get into the playoffs this year. So I really feel a lot more optimistic about this Spurs team, as long as they stay healthy. And of course they are going to get Derek back. Now you're right. I don't think they're ever going to be a top 6 team. Just because of, again, they're having to rely on younger guys, and those guys aren't there just yet. And the veterans, like you mentioned, there's not one sole all-star out there who can kind of carry this team. And because of that, that's why I think that they're going to definitely flirt in that playoff picture, but they're not going to be, 1 through 6 type of team, just based on what I've seen. But I do want to say that they are a lot more competitive. And even like that game against the Mavs, as bad as it looked, they ended up having a chance to win it. And that's the thing is, like, if they, let's just say everything went perfectly for them, they could be 13-3 right now. But we could also say, what if those good moments didn't happen? Well, then they could be 4-12 right now. So I really do think that it's a little bit better of a season, just because of the fact that this is a more competitive team. And we see it with their defense is not perfect. It's 15th right now, as I looked at the numbers this morning, but it's better than last year, and it's good enough to at least keep you competitive in games.
Yeah, I think that's one of the saving graces of this season is their defense is better. While it still isn't Spurs-like, like it was in the past when we were in our championship runs, it's getting better. So that trend is something that you're going to be able to live with, regardless of if it's a win or a loss. You can see that trend is going to increase, and hopefully as the season unfolds, they tighten that up a little bit, because right now, it's early on, and you can see a lot of those inconsistencies. But again, it has a lot to do with our younger players, and then just learning in the context of getting minutes out there. So we're gonna have to be patient. We're not gonna go out and win every single game every single night. It's impossible for us to happen. But with the Spurs loss against the Dallas Mavericks, the Spurs are now, I believe, the 10th seed in the West at 8-8. They're a game behind the Golden State Warriors, who are the 9th seed, and a team that everybody was kind of saying, we don't even know if they're going to make the playoffs. The Denver Nuggets are now the 8th seed, and they're starting to figure some things out. So they're 8-7. Dallas Mavericks beat us yesterday. They are now 8-7, good enough for the 7th position out in the Western Conference. Still, the team that leads the West is the Los Angeles Clippers at 12-4. So the Spurs, when you look at where they fall in the context of the Western Conference, they're good enough to flirt with maybe that play-in game, I think, at the end of the day. But when you look at teams that are worse than the Spurs, in the West, it's only Oklahoma City, Sacramento, New Orleans, the struggling Houston Rockets, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Everybody else is better than us, and it's quite evident. The Spurs just need to figure some things out, and I'm sure that if anybody can right the ship, it can be Coach Pop. So I trust in Pop, and I just hope at the end of the day that this team will be flirting with that play-in game,
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, I think if they can avoid injury, and they are going to get Derek back, which should help them a little bit, they should stay in that area of like 7 through like 10 is where I think they'll stay. And then you look at what's the ceiling of this team. Well, then we see that they've beaten 2 of these top teams. They've beaten the Clippers and Lakers already. But then we look at what can this team do wrong? Well, guess what? They have losses to the Rockets and the Wolves, and those are 2 teams that you just mentioned, 2 of the worst in the West. So like pretty much at 8-8, a 500 team is what they are. And like I said, because of COVID and the situation we're in right now, where a lot of teams are going to lose games, have to not forfeit, but just have games canceled. I think that in the end, you really want to look at your win percentages. So if you can keep around 500 or above, you might be okay this year out West.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and move on here, and now we're going to talk a little bit about your takeaways. And I like this, I'm sorry, I put the wrong graphic up. Let me go ahead and get the right one out. Your takeaways were very telling, I think, as far as like the information that you were putting in there. And we're going to go ahead and display the slide number 1 here. Takeaways, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you've seen out of this team?
Yeah. So just kind of what I was wondering is, I keep a stat for, how competitive are the Spurs in games. And I have noticed, pretty much all these games, they've been competitive in almost every single one of them, only except for, like I mentioned, those 3 losses that they have where they were kind of just blown out. And so I was wondering, I wanted to go to the NBA stats and figure out, exactly how are they doing in crunch time. And so when they're ahead or behind by 5 points in the last 2 minutes, they're 4-5, which isn't bad. 4-5, just barely under 500. But then I wanted to go back to exactly the scenario they were in against Dallas, which means that they were down ahead or behind by 5 points, but they were trailing. I mean, they weren't ahead. I'm sorry, they were just trailing that whole game. They were trying to make that comeback basically. And this is one that's more telling. They're 2-5 when that happens. So we see here that when they get into these games where they're having to make that comeback and get over the hump, they're not able to do that right now with the group that they have. And then I was kind of looking at who's a lot of this offense falling on, who's the player, and we see it by the eye test. I mean, it's DeMar DeRozan. It's pretty easy. So then as I looked at his numbers, his usage percentage was at I believe what was it here? I had it written down somewhere, and it was over 50%. And then when you look at all players in the league, that's actually number one amongst all players. So we see that this team in the last 2 minutes of a game when it's close and they're trying to get over the hump, they're relying on DeRozan pretty much solely. These young guys, Lonnie, Keldon, Murray, they're not ready yet to take over and be those crunch time players. And so you see that all of it falls on DeRozan, and right now it's not working out for him. So I do think in the optimistic point of view, they are going to get Derek White back soon, or in the next few weeks, hopefully. And then I think he's going to help out where you don't, because I think defenses just know, DeRozan's going to attack us. He's going to be the one player that's all San Antonio has to attack us in the last 2 minutes of a game. And so I think that if you bring someone in like Derek who can get to the free throw line, can create for others, also score inside, then it makes it a little bit tougher to kind of just get ready for who's going to attack your defense in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that I like that you included with this takeaway, it says player records when behind or tied by 5. And you weren't specifically, by putting Keldon, DeMar DeRozan, Murray, Mills, Aldridge, and Gay. And I like that you had put the record. What is their record when they're behind or tied by 5? You want to kind of embellish us, and let us know what is it that you actually found?
Yeah, I mean the records are. I think I have here. Keldon's 2-5 when that happens. DeMar's at 2-4. Let me put my stats here. Murray's at 2-4, so we know he was missing from that game yesterday. Patty Mills 2-4. Lamarcus Aldridge 2-3, and then Rudy Gay 2-3. So we see that just by that. I mean, the fact that these are the players that have played 5 or more games in crunch time this year in that scenario. We see that already. Pop doesn't even have the trust of Lonnie, where he's not even putting Lonnie on the floor for the majority of these games. So that's one takeaway for me, is that one of the young guys already, Pop doesn't really trust him in the last 2 minutes of a game. Whereas the other players, it shows that, as young as they are, they're just not producing with wins in these scenarios. And so like I mentioned, a lot of it does fall on the shoulders of DeRozan, where he has to be the guy who has to take the majority of the shots or get to the free throw line for them. But it shows again that they're going to need some time to grow these young players, but also the veterans like Patty, Lamarcus, Rudy. We also see that, as veterans, they're just not getting the job done either at this point in those kind of scenarios. So I really feel like if there's any kind of optimism going forward, they got to hope that Derek White helps out in this department a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, what do you think about Spurs fans who have some harsh words for DeMar DeRozan? They're always saying, how come he can't hit the big shot? And they kind of blame him at times for the Spurs not being clutch when the game gets really close. And then they always go to DeMar DeRozan because at the end of the day, he is one of the better players that we have that can create his own shot. He's good in the ISO situation. So it's understandable why Coach Pop goes to him. But more often than not, the shot doesn't go in, and that's where Spurs fans take a lot of criticism, I guess, and they point it right at DeMar DeRozan. What do you attribute that to?
Well, like I just attribute it to the fact that, like, I guess Pop and them and the team just doesn't have confidence yet to let the young guys do that, that role of creating on their own. Like I can't see, when the defense really sets in, I can't see Keldon just doing that, taking a player one-on-one and trying to, create for someone or score on his own or get to the free throw line. Now he's good at that when it's like the normal, 46 minutes of the game, when it's like more open-ended, court play, he's pretty good at that. But again, when it gets to that crunch time, we see that it just goes away from him in terms of his usage rating. Same thing for I think like DeJounte might show some growth there. So I'd really like to see the team give him more opportunities to try that. Like I mentioned, Lonnie, they're not even putting on the floor in these situations, but maybe he has that potential. And so I agree, it shows by the data that DeRozan is, he's not that, in the clutch moments, he's not showing up here. But again, who's who's going to step up to do that? And so I want to see, going forward in these close games. And it looks like by what they've shown this year, they're going to have a lot more close games like this, where they have a chance in the last 2 minutes by 5 points where they're within a game. So I want to see more so, by observation, do the other players try to take over? Does DeJounte run a few plays for himself or try to get, create for others? Does Keldon Johnson try to do that? So again, I think that the players on the court just, default to going to, hey, DeRozan's our closer. That's our mentality, is DeRozan's the closing guy. And so until somebody else takes over and wants to try that, which I think that will be Derek once he gets back and joins the team, I think it's going to continue to be DeMar. And unfortunately, you're going to see that, right now they're 2-5, like I mentioned, or was it 2-4 with DeMar as their closer when he's taken over all the possessions in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, and you also had asked one big question too. You put the big question is this something they'll have to sustain until Derek White gets healthy? So go ahead and let us know, what do you really mean by that?
Just are they gonna have to continue to go 2-4 like in these scenarios, or 2-5, whatever it is? Just the fact that you might win a few, but you're gonna lose the majority of them. With pretty much DeMar being your closer in terms of carrying your offense. Where I think that again, there's a little bit different dynamic once Derek gets back, because now all of a sudden, as a defense, you're not just getting ready for a DeMar DeRozan attack, a one-on-one play like you mentioned, or creating for others. Now you got to worry about, does DeMar kick out to Derek and let Derek try and attack us? Well, then that gets a little bit different. And again, we've seen in the past that Derek has that ability to be a little bit more calm in his approach in attacking the defense, and whether he needs to get his own shot or get to the free throw line. Now, so like one thing the young players should take note is that, yes, this is going to probably continue to fall on DeMar's shoulders throughout the year. He's our main closer. But if they don't re-sign him in the offseason, or let's just say he gets traded down the road this season before March, well, then guess what? It's on these young players. They're going to be the ones who get the criticism from the fans, because then there's no DeMar there to take the blame for being the closer. It's going to end up on DeJounte Murray's shoulders, on Derek White's shoulders, on Keldon Johnson, and Lonnie Walker's. So whether that happens this season or if it's next season, if DeMar were to leave the team, well, then eventually the young players, they're going to have to prepare, because it's going to be their job soon. We don't know, in the next 2 years probably, to have to be the closer. And so we'll see again if one of them steps up and starts taking that responsibility on their own more so, or if they're just going to wait till let DeMar shoulder the blame right now, and then down the road, once it's their turn, hey, they're going to have to face the fans if they're not showing up and closing out like what DeMar's having to do with all that pressure on him.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and move on here, and we're going to look at your other takeaways. One of those was fourth quarter usage. You had shown specifically DeMar DeRozan at 32%, Murray at 23%, Rudy Gay at 23%, Aldridge at 22%. You even put Patty Mills at 19%, Keldon at 16%, and Lonnie Walker at 16% as far as their fourth quarter usage goes. The younger players, again, you're seeing that Coach Pop hasn't made the decision to really go with them in these fourth quarter situations. As Keldon and both Lonnie, their usage rates are both 16% each, while the veterans are in the 20s, with DeMar DeRozan carrying much of that weight. Again, it goes to, if you want to gain Coach Pop's trust, you got to perform. You got to show you're a solid performer out there before he puts his faith in you 100. I think that we're starting to see a little bit more growth out of Keldon Johnson. I was very hopeful that we're going to see more growth out of one Lonnie Walker coming into this season. I do like the fact that Lonnie Walker did look good in the absence of one DeMar DeRozan. But the only issue that I take with Lonnie Walker, Paul, is he's not very consistent. He has all the tools. He's quick. He's probably one of the fastest guys out there on the court. And not only that, but his athleticism, his ability to just get to the rim. He can create his own shot. And the one thing that differs between him and Keldon is that Lonnie Walker is more of a finesse player, while Keldon Johnson is more of a dog. He's going to go in there and he wants to bump bodies. He wants to knock somebody down, and he doesn't care. He'll put his head down and he's just going to go at the rim. He doesn't care who's in front of him. And, you love that aggression out of him. But if we have to go ahead and compare the two, I think that's the difference in their game. One's a finesse player and one's a power player. And I believe that Lonnie at times, Paul, I think he's still a little bit unsure of himself. While Keldon, he's really starting to come into his own, and he really doesn't care. He just wants to go out there and he just wants to ball. I think Lonnie needs to have that kind of mentality. He needs to be able to trust in himself and just have that confidence build. And I think if he has that confidence in himself, those shots are going to fall and he's going to make better decisions. I still think he hesitates a little bit too much. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it just shows that what he has, the potential he has. Like, remember those two games that DeMar missed? I mean, he had 25 points in one of them where he got to the rim 6 times. I mean, he scored 6 layups in that game, 12 points. And then like you look at just last night, he had 0 points in the paint. And again, I know that when DeMar's back, it's harder for him to become more aggressive and kind of go downhill like that. But I mean, Pop says that they've been telling him as a coaching staff all year that they want him to play like that, just be aggressive, get to the lane. I really feel that in the half court, he's the fastest player who can beat the defense to the rim. Like it's just you just see with the speed, how fast he can get there, and we saw that shown in that Minnesota game. But then he just goes back to being that more spot up shooter, kind of moving the ball around, and it's just like that's the thing is he's just missing that consistency. And I really thought that even last night against the Mavericks, that was a perfect opportunity for him to become more aggressive because DeJounte was out. I mean, they pretty much knew DeJounte was gone the rest of the game right from the opening minute. So then all of a sudden you're missing your second rim attacker. It's usually Keldon, then it's DeJounte and DeMar. It's those three guys. Lonnie could have filled one of those roles and been, they could have used that help of somebody else to kind of penetrate the rim and get into the teeth of the defense. And he just didn't do it again. Again, he was just more so moving around, trying to get his three-point shot, moving the ball around. And so, yeah, I think that's why when Derek eventually gets healthy, I really feel like that's it. That's why maybe the bench would be a better role for Lonnie. Let him be the focal point of that be like a 6-man, like how the role Manu used to have back in the day with the Spurs. So I really feel like maybe that's the way for the coaching staff to get more out of him in terms of his aggressiveness and saying, hey, look, you're in charge of the second unit. You're our main guy who's going to be attacking the defense north to south, getting to the rim. So that's your job now, just like you did against Minnesota. Because right now in the starting unit, it's just game after game after game. He just doesn't do it. And I also wonder sometimes in terms of defense, I do wonder why like his defensive stats is like deflections and steals and stuff. They don't really pop off the page and like how the other players like how DeJounte and Keldon. Now I do wonder if that's because Pop's giving him the main defensive assignment a lot of games, or if that's just where he also loses that activity when he's not on the ball against those players. Because that's something too we should notice that he always has to guard a lot of the better offensive players. He has to guard like Luka Doncic in games, and he has to guard Dame Lillard at times, and those other top notch players. So yeah, that's kind of where I feel about Lonnie right now.
Okay, well I can kind of see that too. I just my biggest thing is I just want to see him get better. While we've seen Keldon really start to grow, I want to see that same type of growth out of Lonnie Walker. I think I can agree with you in that regards where I think he's just not being used correctly at the end of the day. They need to put him in the best situation that's going to play to his strengths, So I hope that they figure that out, as the season unfolds, because we could use somebody coming off that bench and helping this second unit score. It always helps, especially if you're either trying to come from behind or you're trying to sustain a lead, especially against some of the upper echelon teams in the West. You really need a decent bench. You need somebody else to contribute besides your veterans. And right now, the Spurs bench is playing stellar. They're looking really good, maybe with the exception of a couple of games where they have not played well. But most of the time, they're pretty solid every single night. And
Yeah.
I see that when I'm looking at the stat sheet. The Spurs bench really outplays the opposing team's bench almost every single night. So.
Yeah.
And it all has to do with Rudy Gay and Patty Mills. But, the question, Paul, I think, is can they sustain that throughout the entire season? I would say no. I think they're going to need a little bit of help from somebody else. And hopefully that is going to be one Lonnie Walker,
Yeah, because there's gonna have to be someone's gonna eventually join that group because once Derek White gets healthy, whether and right now it would look like Lonnie. If Pop goes back to bringing Derek into starting lineup, it's gonna probably be Lonnie who has to go to that bench, which is okay because I mean, like I said, he's gonna help out a very dynamic group that's already winning ball games for you in terms of being productive off the bench.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen, and I noticed this, and Coach Pop even talked about it, and he touched about this new type of defense he was throwing at Stephen Curry. The box and one.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of it. Because when you basically are trying to go ahead and run a defensive set to stop one particular player, which it's hard to stop Steph Curry. He's so good at what he does. He's just a pure scorer, and he's so savvy and crafty with the ball that he just makes things look easy out there. And it's not as easy as he makes it look. He hits some really difficult shots, And not only can he hit the outside shot, but he's good at attacking. He can do this kind of stutter move, where he kind of lulls the defense to sleep a little bit, and then he has that explosive first step, and he knows how to get that separation. He can kind of puts his body in between, his defender and the rim, and he just does a little scoop shot, or he does something like a little teardrop, little floaters. It's a two. No matter which way you look at it, while it might not be a dunk, he's really crafty with that ball. Really, really savvy and creative as far as him being able to get his own shot up. And when you're doing the box in one, you have all these players that are designed to do one thing, and it's designed to try to impede Steph Curry, and it didn't work. And then when you focus so much on one particular player, as we saw, there's somebody out there just waiting, beyond the arc, just camped out. He just dishes the ball out, and what happens? They hit a three or they hit an open jumper. And I've seen the box in one. It showed its ugly head against the Dallas Mavericks from time to time. I don't know why Coach Pop is doing the box in one, because it makes it seem at times that these players are out of position defensively, but they're not. They're doing that horrid box in one type of defensive set, and I'm not a fan of it, dude. What do you think?
Well, I mean, from Pot's perspective, he's talked about, why he does. First, what he'll do is they always want to, if they were having a perfect defensive night, they would stick to their man scheme. That's what they like to do, and then provide some weak side help. But it's just not working out at times, against certain teams, and so and we see that. So then what he does as a second alternative, he tries to zone against an offense, and we saw that how he went to that against that one Jazz game where they're just bombarding them from threes. And then we saw him go to an extreme measure just the other day against Steph Curry because of his dribble penetration, like I mentioned, off pick and rolls, or how he could just kind of get by anybody on his own. And that was when he went with that box and one. And of course, that didn't work, like you just mentioned. Steph was still carving up their defense even in the box and one. And it didn't matter that even if they got the ball out of Steph's hands, well, guess what? Draymond Green was throwing alley-oops to James Wiseman left and right. You had Kelly Oubre Jr. making some threes. You had Andrew Wiggins making some threes. So when there's like a whole team just scoring from everywhere, whether inside or outside, it's just tough that one player that you're going to try to stop, even though Steph was so dynamic and really stopping them from doing things. So I really feel like they're just going to have to get their work on their half-court defense. Now there's a limitation how good they can get, because again, they're playing players who, like we've mentioned already, somebody like Lamarcus Aldridge, maybe DeMar DeRozan, who their defensive versatility isn't quite there. And then also I really feel like one of the issues with this team is still like their communication. They have some pretty good one-on-one defenders, but in terms of communications and guarding a pick and roll or backdoor cuts and things like that, that's an area where they still need a lot of work. And so again, there's just going to be some limits of how good they can be in their man scheme. And then because of that, Pop, pretty much goes to different alternatives, whether it's a zone or like we've seen here this past week, the box and one now.
Yeah. One of the last things we're going to go ahead and touch on before we get into answering two questions here from our fans is the usage for the Spurs in the last 2 minutes when they're behind by 5 points. DeMar DeRozan, his usage rate is at 51.5%, as you had put out here on this slide that I made for us. It's first in the league amongst all players in the same scenario. Aldridge is 13.8. Mills is 12.5. Murray, 9.7. Keldon is 9.1. Rudy, 4.8. I'm just like, I'm looking at all these, and this is, their usage rates, and I mean, they really go heavy with DeMar DeRozan, I mean, he's seen a lot of usage, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. An opposing team's defense knows this. So more than often than not, what they're going to wind up doing is that they're going to go ahead and really start double teaming DeMar DeRozan, sending different, defensive schemes out there at him, making it extremely difficult for him to knock down a shot. And in these types of situations, this is where we have to have, as you have stated too, somebody step up. Somebody has to knock down these shots. And it seems like the defensive focus for the opposing teams is DeMar DeRozan. So they're daring the Spurs at this juncture. Somebody else beat us. Is basically what they're saying. We need somebody else to knock down shots. We're daring you guys to have somebody else beat us besides DeMar. So in these types of scenarios, though, when the opposing teams, again, they play the passing lane so well, it's hard for DeMar DeRozan to kick the ball out and to one of his teammates and for them to get a quality shot. What do you think they have to do? I mean, because it all has to do with positioning, and a lot of times, again, they all clear out and they're just camped out. Somebody needs to start moving, I think, without the ball. You need to get in a better position to be more conducive to making a quality shot. You can't just be standing around, So I don't know how to correct that, Paul. I don't think Coach Pop does either.
Yeah, and again, that's what they default to. It's just going back to DeMar, letting him be their closer. I really feel like that's where you need another ball handler who can make something on his own as well, especially with the pick and roll. And I feel like that's a job where you got to hope that Murray ends up becoming that player who can get a little bit better in crunch time. I know we've seen him in some close games where he like makes like a little mid ranger when the defense drops back on his pick and roll, which again that's okay because that's a shot that you need there in the last 2 minutes. If that's where it's coming down, that just goes back to like something that Chris Paul likes to do against the defense, and he's deadly from mid range whenever it's crunch time. Chris Paul, that's kind of what he's known for throughout his career. So you want to hope that somebody like Murray becomes that player who can kind of start taking if DeMar sees already that they're getting ready to put two defenders in front of him, when he starts to make his attack, if he can already see that, then he needs to kick out to Murray and then let Murray call like a pick and roll, or because Murray doesn't do very well in the one-on-one scenarios, but if he can call like a pick and roll and then get Lamarcus involved or somebody else, then I think that'll help. Or if they just need to maybe get a little bit more crafty in getting Rudy Gay like more positioning underneath for a post up. Again, I don't see Keldon quite being there just yet because again he doesn't have that one-on-one creativity yet or the ability to run the pick and roll. So Keldon's probably not the player for that, but I really feel like it's going to fall right now on the shoulders of DeJounte Murray. So maybe he would have helped out more yesterday against the Mavs in that scenario. But again, we just don't know because he doesn't take a lot of the usage right now from what we see here in the numbers.
Yeah, so moving forward here, we're going to start bringing the show to an end, and we're going to answer some questions, some fan questions. One of them, I'm going to flash on screen here. It's by our good friends over at Air Alamo. They put, given how valuable Vasile has been on the court so far, how would you approach the usage once Derek White returns?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I've been wondering about it every time I think that Derek's going to get closer to returning is because we saw what happened that one game that Derek played this year against the Lakers. Devin got his first DNP of the season. And as I crunch my numbers after every game, I mean, Devin's defensive statistics are off the charts. I mean, his off-ball activity is so good. I know that at this point he's really just a spot-up three-point shooter. I mean, it's early. He's only in his rookie career, and that's fine. I mean, that's good that he's actually a reliable three-point shooter on offense. But again, you want him out there for his defensive versatility. What he does, he's constantly off the ball, kind of getting passing lanes, tipping shots, preventing passes from getting to another player. So I really feel like they need to make it's going to be tough though because who's going to sit though. That's the problem. And so if they want to have Devin play, I mean, it's got to be like maybe like if I don't know how I think that they definitely need to continue to give him minutes, but I don't know where those minutes come from when you're going to have pretty much everyone healthy. Do you take away minutes from like Rudy Gay at the 4? Do you take away minutes from Lonnie Walker if he's not doing much? So I really feel it's more out of all the players here. I really feel like once Derek's back, I think it'll be Lonnie. I think that if Lonnie's now he's not going to lose his rotation spot, but I think that if he's struggling or he's just not doing much in terms of helping out. When he's on the floor, then I think Pop will make those calls in the second half. Okay, I'm going to give Devin some minutes here. So I don't know who would get those minutes at this point. Who's going to lose their minutes, should I say? But right now, I mean, I really feel like I agree with them. I think Devin needs to play even when Derek White gets back. But again, the question is, whose minutes does he take away from?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really tough. Coach Pop is going to have his work cut out for them because I agree with you on this one, 100. Devon Vasile, what he's able to do on the defensive end is outstanding. Just his defensive tendencies. His IQ out there, it's stellar. I guess that's one of the reasons why the Spurs picked him. So high in the draft. They're like, this kid, we can't pass on him, and now we know why. Because of his defensive prowess, and I think he's pretty prolific at scoring too. He's just not given the green light to do so because again, you have to get the touches. And who are you going to get those touches away from? You're a rookie right now. You got to earn those touches, So basically go out there and play the scheme. And you got to tip your hat to him because he's done the best that he can do as far as learning the Spurs system and doing what's asked of him. So he's having a good rookie season in my book. I look forward to the growth out of this young man. So one of the other questions that was brought up is by Alvaro Martinez. And he put, would you trade Lamarcus Aldridge or DeMar DeRozan before the trade deadline for a first-round pick if we have real chances to enter the playoffs?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I really feel that we know that with Pop as the head coach right now, they're going to want to do whatever they can to, well, for one, they're trying to avoid the luxury tax. We know they're not going to probably sign any players unless they really, really have to, from a financial perspective. But in terms of Pop as the head coach of this team, I think that if there's this, if they're in play for the playoffs, I really feel that they're going to keep this group together. Whether that means not getting anything for Lamarcus or DeMar, as they both enter free agency next offseason, maybe they might lose those players to free agency, and then they don't get anything. They could have maybe got. I don't know if they would even get a first round pick at this point, if I'm honest. Maybe for DeMar, I don't think for Aldridge. But again, I just feel like if they're in the playoff scenario and they're winning ball games and they're pretty competitive, I don't think they're going to make a change to this team. I think Pop just wants to go in with the group that he has, because I mean, if you trade either of these players, you're not going to get a player who's better than them in return. We know that at this point. You would get some future compensation in terms of like a draft pick, like you mentioned, or maybe like a young player. So again, I don't see that now in terms of just if it's like maybe they're 500, like right around there, or they're barely under 500. Well, then I can see them maybe moving one of these players. Now, I don't honestly. I think DeRozan sticks for the remainder of the season. Just because of what he's doing for the team, how much they rely on him. Whereas Aldridge, if he continues to have these these roller coaster performances of looking good one night and falling apart the next night and looking good again, then I do wonder if he never quite gets comfortable with this group, because we saw that he's still trying to get acclimated with this team. Now that his role's kind of been reduced a little bit, if he never gets comfortable, then I think that maybe they continue to take phone calls up into that March deadline, where they have to make that decision. And you always want to keep an eye on Boston. And I'm not saying that the Celtics have any interest in Aldridge. I'm just saying that Boston's one of those teams who's playoff team who can fit in a player of his salary into that trade exception that they have if they make some other moves. So that's why I always kind of keep an eye on Boston of what's going on with them. And if they start falling apart, then maybe they look at a team like Aldridge. And in all honesty, Joe, I just don't know where Aldridge is going to fit in today's NBA unless a team makes him like their focal point or second best option. Because again, like we're seeing here with the Spurs, if all they want him to do right now at this point is be more of a pick and pop, whether it's from three or the mid range, and that's okay. But he can't get himself involved on the offensive end any other way, because a lot of teams are just the Spurs have completely gone away from the post up, pretty much is what it looks like for the majority of the time. And so if he's not getting those post ups, how else is he having an impact on the offensive end aside from his shot? And then also, we've talked about how defensively it looks like he's starting to lose his defensive versatility night in and night out. So I'm really interested to see what they do in terms of if Aldridge stays on this team the rest of the season, or what happens in the offseason when he's a free agent, and who would even look to sign him, what teams would have a role for him.
Yeah, the only thing I can say about this, in answering Alvaro Martinez's question is, if another team has an injury, that could actually make them desperate to make a trade for one Lamarcus Aldridge. At this juncture, I don't know what we would actually get in return for him. Possibly future picks. A future pick, a future first round pick or so. That might be a bit interesting to us. But as far as getting somebody that has equal value, I don't think that scenario will play out. I think we can get somebody comparable, maybe a younger player that has potential. But as far as getting value for value at this point of his career, it's unlikely to happen, So maybe a team could give us a piece that we could use right now, or maybe in the future if we develop. But I think that's the scenario that could likely play out if, in fact, we do wind up trading Lamarcus Aldridge. And just to let the fans know, we do have until March this year to make a trade, because the trade deadline has kind of been pushed back a little bit. So instead of February, now the deadline's in March because of the All-Star game as well. And I'm going to be honest with you, Paul, I don't even know if we'll make it through the whole season with the COVID thing. That's still kind of up in the air. That's probably why the league only released the first half of the schedule all the way up until March, because even they're kind of uneasy as far as what kind of scenario will play out. I'm hopeful with the release of this COVID-19 vaccination, maybe they'll start rolling out this vaccination to both the players and the staff. And if that happens, then maybe we'll see the second half of the season. But I'm still kind of on thin ice about that. But to answer his question, as far as trade collateral goes, I think the Spurs would be more inclined to listen to trade offers for one Lamarcus versus DeMar. If we trade away DeMar, who are we really going to have out there that's a prolific scorer? If we lose that and DeMar DeRozan, you think the Spurs look bad right now? Well, get ready, because they're going to look a lot worse, because really we're going to miss his experience. And when you look at it, at the end of the day, he's still one of the better isolation players in the league right now. He still has value at what he does at his position. So we do see the declining of Lamarcus Aldridge game. It's pretty evident, and he's in his last year here in the contract. So if we get something for him, if it makes sense, the Spurs will listen, I'm sure. And if they feel like it can help the team, they'll go ahead and make the trade. But the likely scenario to me that will happen, Paul, I think, is that we're just going to play the season out with Lamarcus, and we're going to let him walk for nothing, other than just saying we're clear of the books, and maybe we can go after a piece that we need in free agency. That's what I think.
Yeah, and I mean the only way I think they ever considered trading DeRozan this season is if they were to fall apart. I mean, we talk about like being in the last like 12 through 15 part seed in the West. If we see that they just completely start tanking again and just fall apart, then I can see them moving DeRozan, just for assets for the future, and then letting these young guys, because then the young guys can get all that experience of being the guys who have to close in the final 2 minutes and stuff like that, and see what they really bring. But right now, I as long as they're competitive and they're about a 500 ball club, or they're in, as long as they're within 10th place, really, I mean, is all that it takes this year. As long as they're within a playoff grasp, I think they're going to kind of continue to keep this team as competitive as they can, with DeRozan at the helm, and then also, again with Aldridge, we'll see. Again, I want to see what it looks like after like 35, 40 games. If he's still not comfortable and he's very inconsistent, then maybe they do look at more teams and look at phone calls and see what teams are offering as far as the trade deadline approaches.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and bring this thing to a close here. But before we do you want to let us know about anything that you have coming up for Project Spurs for this coming week?
Just, well, obviously we're still doing the Spurs cast each week, but I would just say, go check out Project Spurs. Our stat pages are really, really, interesting that I've kind of worked on those this year. And I, like I said, I update them after every game. So like the one for the Dallas game, I just updated all the new data. It's fresh data this morning. And it's all the stats from the NBA, but I've kind of given, our own little unique perspective to them. I've made, they're color coded in different ways, and it's pretty cool in terms of what I take away from it. So make sure that you check those out if you're visiting projectspurs.com.
Yeah, and just make sure you check out projectspurs.com for all your latest and breaking Spurs news. We have a great staff of writers there that do a tremendous job in bringing you great articles and great insight into the San Antonio Spurs. So definitely make sure you go and check out projectspurs.com, and make sure you follow the staff. You have Colin Reed, you have John Diaz, you have Stephen Michael Anderson, and you also have Vicky Vick, and you have who else am I missing here? Benjamin. How can I forget my good friend?
We got Joe. Did you say Jonas Clark yet? Jonas
Clark too.
And then Aaron Million.
Aaron Million.
I think cost. Did we say Colin Reed? Yeah, I think you said it right.
Yeah, he said Colin
Reed. Yeah, got Colin. Yeah.
So
sorry, we have so many writers too. So sorry if we forgot anyone. But no, they do all. Everybody does a great job.
Yeah, everybody does an outstanding job. So make sure you go and check them out. And you can also follow Paul because he does deliver great statistical information during game time. So where can they follow you on Twitter?
Twitter.com/Paul Garcia NBA. So Paul Garcia NBA.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there you go. So make sure you go and give Paul a follow on Twitter for his great analytical insights. And you can also follow me, Joe Garcia, at Two Shots Podcast. And it's all spelled out TWO, not the number 2, but TWO, Two Shots Podcast. And I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So for Paul Garcia, I'm Joe Garcia. Thank you for watching this inaugural episode of the Spurs Rewind. We appreciate you listening and following us and interacting with us here on social media. And hopefully we look forward to seeing you return and keep watching this show because we enjoy doing it. We're going to have a great group of people involved. We're going to have some of our staff attribute different types of content to this. And we're going to have different guests on here. So that's quite exciting. We'll have different people on just about every week. So when you come back and see us, we'll have a whole new plethora of information to deliver for you guys. So for Paul Garcia, and I'm Joe Garcia, thank you for watching. And like we always say, spread the love, stop the hate, be kind, we're out, peace.